Back in 2017, our next guest's debut novel, The Hate You Give, exploded to bookshelves and took the author to the forefront of conversations about race in America.
Well, now she is taking on a new world with her latest work, Nick Blake and the Remarkables, the Manifesto Prophecy, which debuted at #1 on the New York Times bestseller list. Please welcome back to the show. We love her here, author Angie Thomas. Welcome back.
Thank you.
Okay, we want to dive into this. Nick Blake, it is your first fantasy novel, so congratulations. This is the first book that you've decided to gear towards elementary-aged kids as well. So when you released this book, you posted a throwback photo of yourself, and you said, quote, "This kid with the big collar and thick eyebrows wrote the fantasy book she always wanted to read." So what is the book that that little girl wanted to read?
Well, first off, my mom would be thrilled to know that that picture that she was so excited about ended up on TV in Canada. That was the 90s, with the big collar and everything. But no, that little girl loved reading books. She loved reading books, especially the kind that let her escape and see different kind of worlds and fantasy worlds and go on those adventures. But I never saw myself as the main character in those kinds of books. I'm not gonna name names, but there are some pretty big fantasy book series out there geared towards kids, but the main characters are little boys. Usually they're little white boys, and here I was, a little black girl in the South in the US, and I never saw myself at the forefront of that kind of story. And so I always wondered, why can't I? Why can't I? And I remember having an imagination, seeing abandoned homes in my neighborhood and thinking, oh, that's where the dragons live. Those are the kinds of things I came up with in my head. So now as an adult, I get to make stories that that little girl would have loved.
Oh, love that. Absolutely love that. You also set the story in a place that you're very familiar with. You grew up in Jackson, Mississippi. So talk to us. Why did you choose that location?
Well, it's one you never see in a fantasy book. You see Jackson, Mississippi in books about the civil rights movement and historic fiction. And that's great and all, but that's not the Jackson I grew up in. And there's so much about my city. There's so many rich cultural aspects to it that I was like, you know what? It would be cool to explore it. But then, too, there are cool things about Jackson that even some of the kids who live there didn't know. Like, for instance, the city is built on top of an extinct volcano. And I put that in the book, and I've had Jackson kids write me in a panic, like, "Oh my God, what?" And I'm like, "Calm down, it's extinct." But it was fun to include my city for once, and show that there are some cool sides of this place too.
Well, you alluded to it because even though this is a fantasy book, you actually do weave and thread elements of real American history into the plot as well. So why did you decide you wanted to, insert those little tidbits in this book?
Yeah, it's interesting. I was listening to you all earlier talking about the rise in homeschooling, and I was a homeschooled kid for high school. And then Nick Blake is actually a homeschooled kid. And one reason people are turning to homeschooling in the States is because there's so much pushback on teaching actual history in U.S. schools and U.S. classrooms. They're trying to sanitize topics such as slavery. They don't want to talk about the ugly parts of American history, and parents want their kids to know these things in an age-appropriate way. So I said, as an author, I saw a challenge for myself. I want to still talk about these things because you look at my young adult novels, I discuss real-life issues. I'm not going to break away from that just because I'm writing for a younger audience. So even though this is a fantasy book, we discuss Emmett Till, we discuss racial profiling, we discuss lynching, and we do it in an age-appropriate way, but still, these are topics that kids need to know about so that they know how not to repeat history.
Amen to that. Wow, you bring us to another point. You were talking about this earlier. So your explosive debut novel, The Hate You Give, it was actually, over the last few years, banned in some high schools in the United States. And if you think, everybody, that it's just in the U.S., it's not, because this past September here in Nova Scotia, the Department of Education actually removed that book from the title of its reading resource list as well. It's happening here too. So let's talk about book bans. It's such a big topic right now. What do you think these types of book bans are doing to kids? What happens when you remove these kinds of books from reading lists?
Yeah, well, one of my favorite phrases is by a woman by the name of Dr. Rudy Sims Bishops, who says that children's books are mirrors, windows, and sliding glass doors. Now, if we're removing mirrors for young people who need to see themselves in this book, we're telling them you don't deserve to be seen. If we're removing sliding glass doors and windows for other young people, we're saying this is stuff you don't need to know about. And that's problematic. I feel like empathy is our greatest weapon that we don't use nearly enough. And books are a great way of fostering empathy. So by removing these books, you're removing narratives and you're making sure that kids only get one single narrative when there are so many stories out here that, yes, make adults uncomfortable, but they're things that need to be discussed. They're things that need to be talked about. They're things that kids are actually dealing with. And if we're taking these books away, we're taking their voices away. So that's what my issue is. And the funny thing to me about book bans is most of the time the people who ban the books never read the entire books. You know, they usually read a little snippet here and there. They don't read the entire books. And I've had people who wanted to ban The Hate U Give say, you know what, I read it, and I'm glad I didn't speak up and speak out about getting it removed because this book needs to be in school. So I say, read it.
Also, it's super important, if you're going to ban something, you better know why you're banning it and read the whole book.
Exactly.
How could you not read the whole book? And, you know, speaking on those people, because some people had a problem with the language in The Hate That You Give. So what would you say to those people right now as you're on live television who had a problem with that?
I would say that there are exactly 89 instances of the F word in The Hate U Give, but in 2017, the year the book came out, over 800 people lost their lives at the hands of police brutality. That number scares me more than an F-bomb. So that's what I would say. That's what I would say. And I'd also say language is a cop-out because if you want to go through the book and cross out every curse word, go right ahead. I don't mind if you do that. But if there's still an issue, you got to realize if that issue for you is the topic, you don't want to discuss police brutality, and you need to take a moment to wonder and ask yourself, why is it I don't want to discuss this?
Yeah, it's true. Let's talk about the genre that you have just really shifted over the years, and that is the young adult genre. And for some people out there who kind of still don't get it, you know, what is the impact and importance of YA?
Oh my goodness, it's so important, it's so impactful. I think about the books that really pulled me in as a young person and the effect they had on me. And I tell people all the time that the books you read as a teenager really do help mold you into the adult and the leader you may end up being. You know, I love to tell people, just think about if some of the former political leaders in the U.S. read books, but specifically this one. But specifically this one, if he read books as a teenager, I'm not going to say his name, but if he read books as a teenager written by Black authors or by Latino authors or by Asian authors, what kind of person would he have been? He would have been a whole different person. That's the impact of young adult literature. It's giving young people voices, it's helping them be seen, it's giving them something to learn about themselves, but also it's helping them understand the world. And how can we be angry about that?
Absolutely. What a great note to end on, Angie. Absolute pleasure to have you here. Congratulations on the new book. It is titled Nick Blake and the Remarkables. Make sure you go and get it. Be sure to grab and pick up a copy at your nearest bookstore. We'll be right back.
Hey there, what did you think? Drop your comments below and join the conversation. And don't forget to like and subscribe so you can find more on everything from food and fashion to pop culture and current events. See you soon.